So, sixth group here today, speaking with former Senior Vice President for International Exploration for Equinor, Nick Maden.
Good afternoon.
We're interested to learn more about your process for developing and implementing the exploration strategy during your time at Equinor. How did you achieve this with your global team?
I think the first part of recognizing with any vision that a company has or a strategy that they have to achieve that vision is that it's always a continual process. You can't just stand up and say it once. You have to talk about it, you have to dig into it, you have to share it. And usually at a corporate level, the vision of what you're trying to achieve should be relatively simple. And the strategy you put in place in that should be relatively simple, so that through a whole organization, people can start to understand what it means to them. And a strategy and a vision at corporate level should be relatively simple. If it's complicated, people don't understand it and they don't get behind it. And then, having spent time within one of my groups within exploration discussing the corporate strategy and getting a clear understanding of that, we can then start discussing what that strategy means to our particular business area. And that's a process that needs to go on over some time, and it's part of that trust process where you're building an understanding and building a depth of knowledge. Once you've got a real understanding of the corporate, you can then start, as I say, doing an understanding of what it means in the business area, and then you can really start building up a set of ideas. The first part really of any strategy or any vision is to clearly understand where you are today, what you have in your basket, and then a clear vision of where you want to get to. And then, having got a clear vision of that, you can then start to understand the gap between where you are today and where you're trying to get to, and what it's going to take to fill that gap. And then when you start understanding what it takes to fill that gap, then you really start to understand what things you need to do, what decisions you have to make, what actions you have to take, how you have to deploy people, what they should be working on to start filling that gap. And I think it's quite systematic in that approach. So you can really sort of systemize it down as to the things that you need to do and the actions you need to take. The second stage of a process I always used to do was to take people together at the beginning of the year. Firstly, my direct reports, and have a day where we talk strategy and objectives and all those sort of things to put everybody on the same page. But then I would always turn to them and give them the simple question. At the end of the year, when you're looking back on the year, what is it that will have made it successful? What do you have to have done for yourself, for your team this year, for you at the end of this year to be going, that was a success? And we'd have that discussion, and then we'd get everybody in the room to write up what they thought it would take to be successful. And then what we'd do as a group is actually prioritize that. Because what we'd actually recognize that some people would have projects that are higher priority than others. And so we would collectively prioritize that. And then once we've got a prioritized list, we then sit down and very clearly say, okay, so what action items do we as a group, you as an individual or me as a leader, need to do to make sure we can achieve that target? And we generate a list of action items. And again, we get a collective agreement around that. And that's what we did on day one. And then on day two, we'd have the same meeting again, but we'd bring in the even larger, the next level of management team in again. And we'd do exactly the same process. This time with, my direct reports effectively on one side of the room having already done it. And we would engage the other side of the room in an open conversation. We wouldn't tell them what we'd done the previous day. We'd go through the same exercise. And it was amazing how many times at the end of the day, when we had a list of what were our priorities, what were the things we needed to do, and all those things, when we looked at them, at the end of the second day, we'd have generated the same list with the same priorities and the same actions that we generated with a smaller group on the first day. And that to me was a real demonstration that within a group we had alignment. clear understanding of what we wanted to do, how we wanted to go about it, whose responsibility certain people's tasks were, and that people would leave that room understanding the priorities. They might understand that their project that year didn't have a high priority, but they would understand why other people's projects potentially had a higher priority. And that made the whole engagement process through the year of how you deployed staff, how you deployed resources, very clear to people, because they understood the priorities that had been concluded and got to in that first meeting. And then as the year progressed, you could see how your action items were influencing those sort of targets that you'd set yourself, so that by, again, to the end of the year, you were still on a no surprise basis. You knew how the projects were going, you knew how they were delivering, you knew if you met your targets. No surprises. So that's how we went about it.
Excellent. Just on that, Nick, when obviously you managed a global team, did you face any challenges when trying to implement a strategy across, a global virtual team at all, or not? Was it very straightforward?
It was, I'll say it was more challenging. And the only reason it was more challenging, it took more time. You had to invest more time into that, and more effort and more resources on that side. I would have teams working in Oslo and London and Stavanger and Angola and Brazil and even in the US. So I had teams dotted around the world, effectively all coming together to try and deliver the objectives that we were trying to achieve. Again, we could use similar processes. Simple clarity of message was the important thing. We used to be able to get our exploration vision, strategy, and KPIs into 16 words. Everybody can learn 16 words. As soon as you end up with multiple slides and multiple things and multiple discussions, it becomes very difficult to follow. I used to work for one company that used to do a balanced scorecard that used to run to 46 spreadsheet pages, which measured everything, but probably in the end actually gave no direction. So keeping it simple made it possible. And then it really is about investing time, going to the offices, talking with people. But I also used to bring groups together, bring the Brazilian group who'd be working with part of the Oslo group together, once a year into Brazil, and the Oslo group once a year into Brazil. So bringing them around, getting them to understand each other, talk to each other, so that once you know somebody personally, it then helps to be able to have those conversations on a video. It's very difficult to do it on a video until you've had it personally. But it is just about investment of time.